Hello, everyone. This is Trip. I'm here with Diana Butler Bass. We're going to ruin some dinner, though I'm not thinking we're going to have to put much effort in it. But regular member of the live stream, Lori, is having a chemo day, and she said, you know, what sticks it to cancer more than an air horn? So this is the trigger warning for all of you that hate the air horn. I know it's a very contested situation here, but we've got a lot of practice recently being disappointed with results. So this swing vote here is, Lori, it's chemo day, fuck cancer, and air horn. All right.
Oh, we're all with Lori. We want her to be healed and well, and ready to go on with the next stage of her life. So,
yes, I. Yeah, you know, when you get an election result like this, there's like the big feels, and then there's like the little parts of it that are extremely personal to you. And having multiple trans members in my family, that part felt really personal, along with the drop in cancer research funding that happens between administrations when you don't have a Democrat in charge, especially someone like Biden who's put cancer funding in multiple bills. And so when you start to go through those little things, that was one that woke up going. And I know you've had this conversation as well with leaders and kind of research around cancer about how optimistic people have been in the last 3 years and the amount of progress being made. And so the attack on the university system and research programs for those who both in family and friends, along with, if you're a clergy, walking people through cancer, the idea that we're moving into a place that finds that as something expendable rather than a beautiful example of what we can do as a collective is sad.
Yeah, you know, one of the things I saw almost immediately, some white Christian guy who somewhere follows me on social media. There are a few of them, good ones and bad ones. Wrote, well, you know, we should just take this as a challenge because the church can fill in all these things. And I literally looked at that tweet, and you know, people have been saying that for years, but it's actually been proven to be impossible that that the money that flows from nonprofit organizations and charities, et cetera, in no way can meet the shortfall. And that's a really great example of what won't work, because you can't have major cancer research stuff being funded by anybody except for a government and or a billionaire. And clearly our billionaires have something better to do, and that is to elect politicians who are going to cut their taxes. So they've already given away their money for this year. And apparently there won't be a whole lot left for charities that actually serve the common good. So you can hear from that optimistic Diana is in a really bad mood. And part of it is the fact that I haven't gotten a whole lot of sleep this week. And every time I think I've thought of every bad thing and that I've come to the sort of the bottom of my list of things that will probably happen, someone adds a new one. And thank you, Trip. You just added a new one. I hadn't even thought about cancer research yet. That's not there. Now it is. So yeah, I'm sorry. You know, this has just been a terrible week. It's a bottomless pit of gloom. I don't know how our friend Brian McLaren actually published a book this year called Life After Doom, because honestly, I've been trying to reach him all week. I'm sure his phone is just flooded, and he always returns my phone calls. But this week, I haven't gotten a note back from him. I think he might be fishing someplace out west. And you know, I keep texting him, Brian, it's not after doom. We're nowhere near after doom.
Yeah.
I'm finding new levels of doom.
Not something you were looking forward to there.
No.
Finding.
Someone noticed my flowers. See, I'm cheering myself up here in the corner.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. I think I know this is a completely like no travel week for Brian, so I'm anticipating, because we chatted for like 2 minutes before he got on a plane, and he's like, I have nothing planned next week. I'll talk to you after that. And
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's what's going on with him.
Grace are having a nice time, and he's talking to his favorite alligator.
I was really shocked last week because, I mean, there was the election, of course. But then, I live in Virginia. People don't know that. But the Episcopal Diocese of Virginia, of which I'm a member, um, held its diocesan convention beginning like on Thursday last week. Maybe it was Wednesday night or Thursday night. I don't know exactly what the schedule was, but that means that they pulled literally all of the pastors, priests, sort of helpers, people in church leadership out of their congregations and locked them up in a retreat center someplace in Virginia and had them discussing things like, I don't know, clergy salaries, how to keep the roof on your building. I really have no idea. And who scheduled a convention for 2 days after the most contested, horrible election, in the United States history? And I thought to myself, and the poor clergy were just going nuts because they knew that they really needed to be home with their congregation. So I was talking about Brian on the road, because the calls, were, I can't even imagine what it was like in many church offices. That was one of the first things I did. I texted and emailed the priest in my church and said, "Oh my gosh, we have to talk."
Yeah.
And so, for those of you who are, in other words, those of you who are clergy out there, we know that you've had a particular and sort of extra burden this week. And some of that extra burden may have been placed on you by your own denominations, in addition to the sort of larger cultural issues. And we know, that you're exhausted, and just want to call that out. And folks, try to be gentle on your clergy next couple weeks. Offer to help rather than making demands from them. It would probably be a good idea.
Yes, I was working at a large mainline congregation in California during the Obama Romney election. And it's one of the churches where the early service is smaller, richer, and older. And then the more vibrant, younger service is more in line with the United Church of Christ in lots of ways. So it was kind of like two congregations. And we had the brilliant idea, Diana, doing a special Eucharist service the day after the election. And well, let's just say it was a very partisan attendance. I think only the individuals that helped plan it from the losing side showed up. Mm-hmm. And that, I thought to myself, "Oh, Tripp, you're so naive. Why did you even do this?" All the flack and things that came up from it.
Yeah.
And that was then. Just thinking about it now, and what kind of responses you get from people, all the anxieties that show up. I mean, this is something, when we talked earlier, you made a point that was really helpful to me when you talked about, when we talked on the phone earlier, about how it's like you were aware that just as a female, the experience of this election is just going to make things more intense.
Right.
And, even if conceptually I have like the same worries, it's existentially different if you're a male versus a female, or, lots of different ways of kind of how you find yourself in the world, connected to potential fears on the horizon. And knowing that sets up for lots of things, say at home or at work or conversations with friends, to just get to feel so much more energy and pressure in it, mm-hmm. that the space for compassionate listening is more needed. And often that ends up being clergy who come there. So just as someone that's been in that context, letting people know, you may think you're just asking a little question or have a small criticism or something, but they could have been listening to a lot of people bearing a lot of fear that week, and any human, it builds up.
Yeah.
So,
and yours is just one more piece. So
yeah.
I did wind up having a very interesting conversation with the pastor in my church, and did everything I could to make it completely clear that it was nothing personal. And I was that she had done a good job, but there was also an issue that I think that she wasn't able to see. And so that's appropriate, and that's fine. And if you have a good relationship, I think, with a clergy person, you can go that way. But anyway, I just wanted to say one of the things that I think you just said, to this really important underscoring that private conversation that we had about how people in different kinds of communities are endangered in different ways, and that women, despite the fact that a majority of white women did indeed vote for Donald Trump, despite everything, all of it, women are in a particular kind of vulnerable space. And a lot of folks I know who did vote for Trump, or may have voted for Trump, or maybe just trying to soothe my feelings, who have been saying things like, oh, he just said that to get elected, or it won't be so bad, or, we can't tell yet because he's not even president. All the stuff people are saying to kind of make themselves feel better, or make people who are really depressed like me feel better, or just trying to justify their own vote. This is already happening. In the last 4 days, there has been a 4,600% increase of hate speech directed at young women on social media. And I didn't invent that statistic. It has been already researched and algorithmed out, and it's been reported by, let's see, I have it right here on my phone. Bloomberg, I know, is one of the sources reporting it. So we're not talking about, sort of terrible news groups. We're talking about highly respectable news sources. Bloomberg, The Independent in London, Amnesty International. I'm not sure what ISD Global is, but I'm going to look that up. That's one of the other ones that's been reporting it out. CNN is now reporting it out, and a couple other news organizations that are very high quality and are not people who purvey in lies. And so there's a particular form that the hate speech has been saying is that young women on social media have been receiving everything from personal texts to a sort of swarm attacks on their Instagram accounts or their they won't be on Facebook, but their Threads accounts, whatever their other sort of accounts are. And the line that is being delivered to them, mostly by young men who are part of MAGA or who themselves are white Christian nationalists or just think it's funny, is the line, your body, being directed at the woman, my choice. What the men are saying to these women, these girls and young women, your body, my choice. And so, in effect, there are young women all over this country, and they are now being told that they are embodied slaves to the choices of men. And those women are white, and they're Black, and they're Latina, and they are Asian American. It doesn't matter. And I started seeing it because different moms that I follow on social media who are pastors began reporting this, saying that their daughters were receiving these kinds of things. And that is, and I've heard the same. I haven't seen nearly as much of it, but you may have heard this too. The same from African Americans who apparently have been getting a lot more technologically directed hate speech, and I'm sure we'll have a story about that in the next couple days as well.
Yeah, no, the text messages going out to African Americans were in relationship to picking cotton.
Oh,
And I know the Breaking Points, the news show, it did a segment on it, and there's like a company that gets used to send text messages, right? Like you sign up and then send the text messages, and say tracked it back down to that company, and it's kind of sending anonymous text messages to numbers that you have. So,
right. Yeah. So what I guess I wanted to bring up about that is that, for example, when I've been talking to a lot of different clergy, tons of clergy actually all fall, and one of the things I think that mainline clergy in particular, who are in an incredibly vulnerable position, we can talk about how people voted and why mainline clergy are actually in a more vulnerable position than, say, evangelical clergy, or, I mean, interestingly enough, even rabbis in Jewish congregations. But they've been saying to me things like, the "it won't be so bad" line, or "we have to give them a chance," or "maybe Trump is moderated." And to that, very cynical Diana, just rolls her eyes and says, that's what people were saying for 4 years last time. But I've been reminding people that there is a huge difference between 2016 and right now, and that is this whole movement of hatred has been building over the last 8 years. I mean, it was there, it was in the corners, but when it emerged and Trump was elected in 2016, it was really a shock to so many people that this was happening. And there are still a lot of people who didn't believe it, even though they would see something like Charlottesville or what have you. And so we're how many years are we past Charlottesville? That was 2017.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it didn't stop. As a matter of fact, it grew not only in terms of numbers and influence, but it deepened its roots among particularly white Gen Z men. And we have data about this. And Melissa Deckman, who is a great political scientist, she actually wrote a book on Gen Z politics and began pointing this out to people more than a year ago, that this was occurring. And so you have this sort of move towards this Gen Z white male embrace of Donald Trump. And it's partly because that's all they know. If you think about, if you're an 18-year-old in the United States today, and this argument, this conversation, these kinds of movements have been growing, especially on social media, for more than half of your life, you might think to yourself, "Well, that's what manhood means." Manhood literally means looking at a woman and saying, "Hey, your body, my choice," because that's what Donald Trump does, because that's what somebody, or Joe, I don't know about Joe Rogan, but because he's the most respectable of this kind of crowd, I think, probably. But there are other people on podcasts who surely do. We know, we've heard them. We watch them on Twitter. They attack me on Twitter all the time. And so this has become more and more and more embedded in our culture. And that's what I think a lot of good-hearted white people still don't get. And that was one of the things that was worrying me most in advance, was the ability to not see the true depth of the transformation of American culture in this brutal, I mean, this is not American individualism. I mean, American individualism around a long time, we can cope with that. This isn't it's not even really what people call toxic masculinity. It's a brutal self-serving ideology where you yourself are arbiter, judge, and god of everything around you, and literally to hell with anybody or anything that tries to stop you from achieving your desires. That is not American individualism. That is something that is, I mean, I would love to hear you talk about this. To me, that seems like it's almost a pure Nietzscheism that has taken root in our culture. And I'm at a loss for words for it, but except for that piece where I could see it in Donald Trump and I could see it inspiring all these people who were voting for Trump. And what it means is that is the ideology that's the most deep-seated ideology attached to this presidency. And that's not something that, somebody says, oh, it was just a joke or what have you. It will drive policy and it will drive other candidates. And it certainly drives people who think that's the path to power and success in the United States.
Yeah. So there are two elements of that I find, two elements that phenomena has made me think about. One is, you mentioned one, like just the duration of this moment has meant an increasing number of people. The cultural energy is normative. And that both includes the kind of toxic hate energy. It includes the desire for cultural control. You can see across different ideological groups where you want purity, cancel culture, all these kinds of things are, they're very, they become performative and then they become expected. And then it ends up creating a kind of sociality that is just a different relational norm. And for those that this has made up a larger part of their conscious life, is bigger.
That's right.
And so there's that duration element, but there's also the time element. When you raise the question of something like Christian nationalist or MAGA or the kind of manosphere and all these different groups that have a kind of cultural antagonism on the right in it, and there are parallel ones that seem to be less problematic at this point on the left, but that cultural antagonism, it also is changing just the not just the span of time, but the duration of time in the day, because the younger you are, the more of your relationships are algorithmically mediated, the more of your uncomfortability of just encountering otherness and another person, difficult conversation, struggle to focus to read, to insert any of the things humans have.
Right.
We carry around a device that learns what helps us escape. And so there's like the duration, but then the percentage of the day where you're encountering your tribe's worst expression of itself has gone up. And then the like underneath that, it makes me think that, one of the things in psychological sciences and looking at human beings is that we create cooperative motivations and social norms. It's kind of the human being after we outsourced cooking to fire and not our body. We have all this energy that comes up and we start having social symbolic relationships, all these things that enable human beings to cooperate. And cooperation is so shaped by norms that humans culturally learn norms, motivations, expectations of what is punished and celebrated, standards for judging others. And these norms are so stable when the social fabric has shared stories, shared heroes, these kinds of things. But what we see in both the scale of duration and the scale of time shift is where the sociality of a person is being hijacked, and we have this kind of antagonism running up. And one of the increasing things in psychological science, something that kind of blew my mind when in the last 5 years spending time on different research projects, is how how much cultural evolution of social norms has influenced human beings. That they even call it the process of self-domestication. And see, it's self-domestication because we know what we do biologically, how our drives work for food, shelter, protection, reproduction, and culture became a way where we created kind of a pro-social basis, where docility, like handling things through communication and cultural mediation versus violent
killing one
reactivity.
Another.
And that it has reduced reactive aggression. And so to me, the duration part and the length of time in a day makes me go, oh, we shouldn't be surprised the more we know about how psychology works for human beings, that we're undermining what is something that I think those that celebrate democracy or institutions with integrity celebrate is like, look what we've accomplished as a species. Like there's something very good about the fact that we've come up with ways of putting norms and expectations and motivations and standards and such before us that lead to cooperation and mutual flourishing. And the thinking of just how important that has been for human beings to evolve as a species, and seeing how our technology and I think the material anxiety of a culture, the breakdown makes me more concerned, which is why when we were talking about the election before, I was on the more pessimistic side. I would have rather been proved differently. Yeah.
I know we've flipped roles here. Because I was the one who was slightly more optimistic and thought people would do better. I do want to mention before we kind of move on with some of the other pieces that I know we wanted to talk about, is that a lot of people in the chat are saying, well, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? And I think that one of the things we do is we don't move too fast to the question, what do we do? Because when you are lacking sleep and you're in sort of immediate shock, and you're afraid, or you're, angry or heartbroken or whatever, you don't actually make terribly good decisions about what to do. And so I was talking to a friend of mine who's a rabbi, and he said, well, this is one of the reasons why after, someone who's beloved dies, you sit Shiva for a while. And I think that that's kind of what you do. At least initially, is that you sit with it and you don't dismiss the discomfort of it. Instead, you go into a sort of a deeper place of memory and prayer and telling the stories and trying to get to the point where you can begin then to let go of the most difficult to manage emotions and start clearing the deck towards better choices. And so I think that anything that anybody says to do right now is probably not the thing to do. And so I'm actually just giving myself a chance. Someone said lament. That's really the strategy behind lament as well, too. And what I've just been giving myself a chance to do is to really think through all the conversations I had in advance, all the fears that I have had in advance, ask myself which of these fears are realistic, and which are beginning to even come true now, and which are most likely to come to pass. And so I think that in doing that, I'm actually trying to lower my shock level, because once my shock level comes down a bit, then I'm hoping for more clarity about what to do. And one of the kind of the craziest things I think I've seen is that I'm getting besieged by one person in my email who keeps saying, well, the thing is, the Democrats got to get out there and they got to organize and do all the social media strategy and blah, 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 blah. And it's like, go for it, whatever, all hands on deck. If that's where God is calling you, that's great. But you know what? I'm not getting recruited to your cause right now, because I've just got to, I have to talk with my friends. I have to think this through. I have to do the kind of writing I normally do to try to see my way forward. And, I offer that up to my friends and to readers, as part of the path that I am taking toward the future. And if it's a good path for you, I'm really, really glad that you find my friendship valuable in that way. But I'm not going to be putting together a movement anytime soon. I can't say that. My friends, Robbie Jones and Jamar Tisby and Kristen Dumais and I are going to be in Atlanta this coming weekend on Sunday night with another Faith and Democracy event. And we're all kind of looking at each other going, well, we kind of knew what to say before, but what do we say now? And so it'll be interesting to see what we say, because we just want to be together. And we figured there were other people who might want to be with us.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if the part of what could be different is that there is, at least for that one day, some kind of clarity of where we are as a country with, a rather binary set of options.
Right.
As someone who's been kind of tracking a movement that hijacked a party and then has all the levers of power now in a country, is there what kind of takeaways or learnings are you seeing with the reality of the results?
Yeah, see, that's I also appreciate there's somebody in the comments who said, well, we do have to do some things. And I feel that is correct. What we do have to do is prepare ourselves for the fact that on day one, and even before day one, there are going to be enormous numbers of people who are under threat. And so in that sense, we have to figure out what we're going to do. Are you going to choose to be in denial? Or when that starts happening, are you going to choose to think it won't ever happen? And so you're just kind of going to, pay no attention to however the next 8 weeks unfolds? Are you going to say, okay, this is a real possibility, I'm not going to deny it. What will my choices be if this really comes to the fore? So I do want people to be thinking about that. And that's very urgent, is that you actually do need to be making those considerations. That's one of the reasons why, for example, I've been up at night, is because sometimes when I'm, there's nothing else around me, you're in silence, something will occur to you. And you just sort of sit straight up in bed. You think, okay, well, I hadn't thought of this, and maybe I need to do this. So I think I want to push people at this point simply toward the place of whatever it is that helps you prepare for taking action as you are called to do so, or as you feel like you must jump in and do so, even if nobody even asks you to do it. Those are the things that need to be done now. And those things have to be done with some urgency. So I actually got in a conversation with a clergy person about this. It's like, well, I have to comfort my people, blah, 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 blah. And I said, yeah, you do have to do that, because people are crazy and you have to kind of lower the temperature. But you're also going to have to figure out how to prepare them. And so I think that's, maybe it's just great that it's Advent, coming up, because in effect, that's what the whole season of Advent is for Christians.
Yeah.
It's all about how do you prepare for the coming of God with us, when you don't even know what shape that's going to take. And so in this sense, we're not preparing for something we anticipate joyfully, but we're preparing for something that we really could be hurtful. It's kind of like that anti-Advent, maybe. We have the Antichrist, we have the anti-Advent. Please, nobody quote me on that. I showed up on that woke preachers clips thing, which is Oh, please. Just be nice to Diana. Don't tell your friends.
Don't tell your
I
friends.
just said that.
Yeah. I and part of this is having been working on the big Bonhoeffer project over the last year. But that period between the wars, the world wars in the European church, there were these two different drives. One were these you have the crisis of all these nation states after the war. You have what happens to Germany after the Treaty of Versailles, the depression, the war. There's just economic shifts taking place dramatically, right? This is a time where large portions of Europe are industrializing versus farming. You have the introduction of a different banking system, so debt functions differently within the nations. There are all these big structural things. And then you have a crisis where war was something before culturally that had this kind of nobility to it, that then you're in trenches and there's gas and machine guns, right? So there's
Mud
a
and
whole generation
yeah,
that saw like this was the project of civilization sent us to trenches
right.
and this kind of thing. And that's where you get one kind of response, or where religious responses became champions of culture, where religion, people sought a return to religion as a means of gaining control over a world that's just so they're so shook by the fluctuation of reality, the pace of change, the demands before them, that and this happened not just in Germany, but it definitely did there, where there's this desire for a return to the past, for stability of identity, and things are going on. And then there were others, the ones that you get grouped together in that period between the wars, theologians of crisis like Barth, Tillich, Bonhoeffer, Bultmann, Gogarden, that whole group. They go, no, where religion shouldn't be the re-legitimation of a system that created this reality. That's not its function. Religion is a response of the God who is other showing up. And when God shows up, the world is revealed in its brokenness and its reality. It's judged before justice, and the recognition of its grounding in a reality of grace through faith is there. And so I'm like 98% sure I'm going to do a Advent class that just looks at 4 different theologians of crisis and how they preached Christmas
Oh,
and Advent in
that's
that time.
great.
Because it like America did not have theologians of crisis, because at that point our world, the globe, the our role in the war, the ocean and stuff kind of separated us from a kind of crisis. But
even we had it too. You know, I was thinking about how Roosevelt. I was thinking about, and your series inspired me to think about this. You know, you're doing this thing on Bonhoeffer, and I was thinking about how the rhetoric of Hitler shaped a world, and that Bonhoeffer had to step into. I mean, as a young man, that was the world he just simply graduated from seminary and had to be in, and that Hitler had this amazing capacity to tell stories about that kind of change that you're talking about, and then gather up sort of a new vision out of that then inspired people to act in ways actually probably no one ever would have guessed they act and would act, and that shocked then other people like Bonhoeffer. So I was thinking about that and I thought, well, what about the United States? And then I realized that, that's in effect, Roosevelt is exactly the same as Hitler. Oh, there's another thing. Please don't quote that out of context. But what I meant, like I said, context is everything. But what I mean by that is that Roosevelt had this uncanny ability to shape words, or to shape worlds by words. And so, in the midst of depression, when Americans are dealing with the collapse of what their familiar economic system, when they are looking across at Europe and realizing, hey, we don't understand this. The Europeans are they our trustworthy friends? Are they people we're going to be at war again with? There's all this problem about racism right here in the United States, and they're seeing it, the violence in American cities and all kinds of stuff that's exploding. The Klan in the interwar period. So while the United States is isolated, it's across a big ocean. That ocean, it doesn't stop everything. And in this case, it didn't stop. And tons of those anxieties, especially related to economics and technology and identity. It's like, who are we going to be in this new world? And it was in that space that Roosevelt stepped in and starts telling stories. And what was the most effective thing that he was able to do? And that is the fireside chats. I remember my grandmother when I was a little girl. She loved Roosevelt so much. And one of the first things I ever knew about politics, besides my mom and John Kennedy, which story I've told a ton, but one of the other things that I have so many early memories of is my grandmother literally telling me about what it was like to sit around the radio and listen to Roosevelt talk. And so that was actually happening on both sides of the ocean. On one side of the ocean, it's Hitler talking on the radio and in his mass rallies. And on the other side of the ocean, it's Roosevelt sitting next to you in the radio and giving you a sense of identity and community and meaning and purpose and vision and all the things that leaders can do in moments like this to be able to move people forward. So anyway, I was just thinking it was really an interesting comparison. And you made me really kind of go there and to think about the power of rhetoric, the power of telling stories that transform the world. Now, see, again, I'm not talking here about forming a media strategy or anything like that. I mean, that's for somebody else to do. But we can all tell stories. And we all have listeners in that effect. And I think, a lot of people are often afraid to tell the stories without really understanding that the way that they shape those stories can change the world around them.
Do you think FDR's kind of within American political history the most successful advocate for a kind of economic populism.
Right.
And I think that when you think of the promises of FDR that are, supporting the narrative he's telling, it's that kind of language is foreign, even from, even within the Democratic Party, and people definitely don't hear it. So I do think that there's we're in a story deficit disorder of sorts.
Yeah. But it's interesting. Somebody pointed out in the chat the exact thing that Richard said to me when Richard and I were walking, and I was talking to him about your program about Bonhoeffer and listening to the Hitler pieces that you guys have on that, and then making this contrast with Roosevelt. And then he said, well, you really need a third voice in there. And this is what the person in the chat put in, Churchill. Because there's another voice of meaning, purpose, world making, as it were. And you can really look at, I think, maybe that triad of people in the interwar period, and that they're all functioning in a similar technological fashion, but they're making really kind of three worlds. And two of those worlds eventually can cooperate, collaborate, and be friends. The world of really what I would call gentle imperial fatherhood. That is the world of Churchill, the king who is the good king, is really the story that Churchill is telling. And for king and country, and you got Roosevelt with economic populism. But interesting, of course, he started out with the elites, and the only way he could achieve economic populism was by first of all, the technology, those fireside chats, and garnering enough power from the actual people themselves in order to be able to turn the system on its head and then give people what they really needed from their government. And then, of course, Hitler, who invents something that he believes the people need, and that is a scapegoat. Kill the Jews, the Germans will shine for 1,000 years. And so the answer isn't just in storytelling, and the answer isn't just in technology, but it's the right kinds of stories that connect people at a deep level to being their best selves and create a vision, I trust, of a common good that can move us forward in a way that isn't hurtful and horrible. And I mean, that's why MAGA, people call MAGA a cult. Well, it is like a religion. And this is why it's like a religion, because that's what religion does. It binds people together in a common vision, common purpose, and a common sense of meaning. And yeah, it's a religion. Donald Trump is the high priest of it. It's very hard. It's very hard to defeat that.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So we had a whole of all the other topics we talked about talking about. Which one do you want to do next?
Oh, gosh. I want to hear you. The thing I really want to hear you ruminate on, because I'm pretty tired actually, is before the election, I had Julie Ingersoll from University of North Florida on the cottage, and Julie was talking about Christian nationalism and Project 2025. And at the beginning of her presentation, she did a sort of a thumbnail sketch of the three movements that had coalesced at this moment that were bringing us Trumpism, bringing us to now, really. And she talked about those three movements as Christian nationalism, and that's what she was focused on in the podcast. But then she talked briefly about the other two, and one was white Christian nationalism, or Aryan Nation, all these sort of white supremacy movements. And then the other one is the manosphere. And I thought to myself, oh, well, of these three things, I know I know the Christian nationalism stuff inside and outside, and I know an awful lot about white supremacy movements, but I don't really understand the manosphere. And you do, because you warned me in advance about what was going on with podcasters like Joe Rogan and what you were hearing through the whole sort of bro culture that you actually pay attention to, that I've always poo-pooed. And I want to hear you talk more about bro culture and the manosphere and explain that to us, because I think that we need to know that.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's something I kind of first encountered when it was starting, because so many of my students and former students would end up posting something, and I'm like, what the hell? Where you're like, oh, I'm not sure about this kind of thing. And you can see how it's continually gained stream. And I think there are kind of three elements of it that, and I'll try to describe it in a way they might hear themselves, and you can go ahead and guess what parts of it I find plausible or not. But underneath it, I mean, one element is that there's a general crisis around what masculinity looks like in an egalitarian world. And that crisis is intensified when you're in any family kind of generational structure at that shift. And so what has hopefully, in the norm sense, already been internalized by the cultural elites, those with graduate educations, these kinds of the individuals who watch mainstream media and news. There's that kind of shared socialization of an egalitarianism and this kind of thing where there's a kind of contact point for male-female relationships about expectations, accountability, and such. When those norms become dominant in culture and political situation and are being imposed by people whose their own self-definition of success, masculinity, character, integrity are experienced as judged as less than ideal, as patriarchy, or insert whatever way it's experienced, then it creates a crisis where you go like, well, what do I have to do, right, to accommodate into this space, like to be present, and for the whole in the bro culture world, the any extreme demands that come out of that context then become normative for it. So you can see it in the Kamala Harris ad that ran, right? So
The trans ad?
yeah,
you mean?
but underneath it, there's different elements of it. One is like, we're spending tax money to have a gender alignment surgery for an illegal alien in a prison, but Joe Biden was president when we stopped the child tax credit and insert all the things that you're like, well, that was Manchin or that was sabotage. It doesn't matter. It's just like the checks you got and the support you got on student loans, on child tax credit. There are all these things that just drop in the middle of his administration. And so you're feeling that, the heat of that, which for me was another $600 and some a month of writing a check to student loans. And obviously a tax credit if you have 3 kids. And then you're sitting there going like, we're paying for what? Now, does it matter that Trump was president and that was the law then? No, it doesn't. It's just like there's this emotional response to it. But underneath it, it's also like an illegal alien, and they have that, the stealing jobs. You feel it much more a threat if those are potential jobs you have, wage restriction, all those other kind of things. And then just the whole language of it, right? Where you're like, not only do I have to figure out how to act different when I'm around, but now I have to use like weird words, right? So all those cultural things sit there and it just lines up where you go, I don't even know if I have a place in this world. And the big boogeyman that everyone gets to point to and demonize are white dudes or bros or whatever. Like everyone else you get in trouble if you make fun of them. We get to get made fun of. That is the contact point for so many of these people. And a lot of them didn't start that way. They got that way. So take Joe Rogan as an example. He endorsed Bernie Sanders. Okay. Wow. He endorsed Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders went on his podcast. Yeah. He endorsed Bernie Sanders. He goes on his podcast. He's like, and on it, he basically said, yeah, I just think some of the identity politics stuff's stupid. Like he goes, I bet there are real trans people. They should get all the care they have. A dude should not wrestle a woman. That's cheating. Now, you can think whatever you want on it, but then he takes ivermectin during the COVID thing. And then what does CNN do? Oh, he's taking horse tranquilizers. He starts getting attacked. Bernie Sanders, the whole invention of the Bernie Bro label was after Joe Rogan and talked to Bernie Sanders. The next time Bernie runs, he does more signaling towards identity politics and class politics. And so in that time, you see people who move, much like Joe, all the way over. And if you go look at the times he trends, it was almost always cultural elites attacking him. And so the veracity of humanities degrees and culture criticism, it's like, well, what do you want me to do? You're attacking me for everything. You don't even tell the story correctly. Go on CNN and Anderson Cooper sitting there going, he's doing horse tranquilizers. He's against vaccines. He's like, I'm not. Like if you listen to the whole episode, I said, I give my kids all the vaccines. You should do this and this. Here's some research. I was wondering about what age you take this or which one of the vaccines you take. And it might have, had a lab origin. It gets canceled. And now, people are back up thinking it's 50-50 on where the origin was. So if you are experiencing these kind of ongoing criticisms, it's like, well, why do I want to hang out with you? You could see the same thing in Elon Musk. If you go back earlier, he's very clear about how he thought he should have been taxed more, how there should have been a bigger safety net, all this kind of stuff. And then he's now where he is. And so like on like there is it has kind of cycled through. The best label I like is I find helpful is Barstool conservatism, like so Barstool Sports, which is technically bigger than ESPN until they started purchasing Barstool Sports commentators, but it's sports. It's like a sports network that started online, and it is hyper masculine and has male type of humor, all that kind of stuff there. And it was growing and outgrowing ESPN, who was accommodating like a Disney company would to kind of the cultural expectations of cities and humanities departments. And so
with female commentators in the locker room and
but see, there are even females on Barstool. They just are culturally in this space, which I'm guessing are the females who, voted for Trump. And a lot of them started out on the, I think we should be culturally libertarian. I'm kind of weird on a few of these things, but economic, much more populist because they tend to be working class, suspicion of institutions and the rich. And then the home for them, they felt pushed there. And I think that trajectory, understanding it, that movement in the cultural space, the recognition of a crisis in different families' transition towards the egalitarian expectations and relationships, and then the third element is the economic conditions are significant. That what does success look like? Both college graduation rates and high school graduation rates, male versus
drop
female,
through the floor,
earning potential, the debt you come into, and so when you think the system as it is, the political and economic system has space for less and less people, and you don't believe institutions are going to provide, that they aren't trustworthy anymore, they're not responsive to the people or meeting these needs, then that generates a lot of fear. And so what is it you want in that? You want control, and you want something you can be responsible for. And so that I think that makes the idea of a entrepreneur or a businessman who's like, screw the rules, I'm going to get mine, is a model, because you don't believe the system's going to give you what you want. You're going to go do, this other thing. Right. And so the same kind of MO that in the 80s was greed is the same kind of activities now, not energized by greed, but fear of being a person that doesn't have a space in the country, doesn't have security, doesn't have identity, doesn't know how to be present in relationships. And that kind of fear, it's like, then who am I modeling myself after? Who is showing me what the virtuous life? Then when people like Joe Rogan or Jordan Peterson or all these individuals that experience publicly critique from cultural elites keep moving right, then I think that pulls people there. And if we trust the science, harassing them about it makes that whatever we harass them more important to their self-identity.
Right. And so, I've talked about the ineptitude of shaming. Only makes it worse, especially when people have religious views, or important religious views. When you start shaming them, at least fundamentalist religious views, what I would call, the more dogmatic or doctrinal religious views, the more you shame them, the further they go into those views. I mean, everybody should be aware of that by now. Shame works differently for liberals. But for people who have some conservative tendency or traditionalist religion, it very much drives them further into the thing rather than creating a space for them to reconsider the thing itself. So, well, I appreciate that, Trip. That was very empathetically told, because it's, I mean, honestly, it's really hard for me to hear some of that. Because as a woman, it's just like, well, boys, grow up. I mean, because part of it, I think, is there has been an expectation among particularly white American men that all those things, power, control, privilege, etc., wealth, respect, all those things are their birthright. Whereas, that hasn't been true for a lot of the rest of us. And so it doesn't help me to say that to a guy who's feeling this. I realize that. But at the same time, most Black men are thinking that, and certainly thoughtful women or women who have themselves, just really been able to name their own experience of that lack of respect and the lack of opportunity, or, I mean, just the simple offenses against femaleness that happen literally every single day. It's very hard for us to go to the empathetic place.
Do you think part of it is, and I've told you conversations with my cigar store buddies, which is like my regular interaction with working class people across racial divides in the South.
Right. I have been thinking about that all fall. And I never wanted to, but I do.
So one of the, he's a second, well, he's the firstborn in America generation, but he's from Guatemala, and he's kind of mid-level in a construction company, and something he said to me, because we got in a conversation about, well, I don't pick these conversations, I'm usually just present for them. If you tell them all that you're devoutly Christian and socialist, you kind of like you're on an island when it goes into the cigar lounge. But he said that it just feels like every time I talk to one of you people, which I assume this is in reference to white people with graduate education, or I knew who he meant, and he goes, you just think I'm a sexist asshole until I prove otherwise, and I know that's what you're thinking. And he said, you can't tell me you thought I was anything different until we became friends, right? And I know, and he was right, and half of that description I think still fits him, but but I think that's like the element is at what point, what the cultural energy of one group is experienced by the other, that he knows he's seen as contempt from one tribe. And so the idea of thinking that they really have his interest at heart, right? I was sitting there, I was like, yeah, but the Biden administration did X, Y, and Z. This is what happened. This is where this, right. And he's like, it doesn't matter. I know what y'all think when you see me. I have to prove otherwise.
Yeah, but see, honestly, Trip, I'm not arguing with you because, we're really good friends. But the truth of it is really, boys grow up, because someone sees me on a plane and I'm immediately a dumb old lady. They see someone who's a little pudgy and has gray hair and, pulling her suitcase along, hyperventilating because I've actually had to run across O'Hare for another short connection. And I sit down in first class, and you know what always happens is that all the men around me, because they're almost all men, look at me and think, what the fuck is she doing here? Oops, I'm so sorry. I just swore. Hey. I just pulled a Nadia Bolz-Weber.
Woke preachers of Twitter.
Sorry, woke preachers on Twitter are going to get me. But so anyway, it's like, what is she doing here? And you get really, that is one thing I can empathize with. If that's really how those guys are feeling, I get that, because that is how I have spent my entire life. Because before I was the dumpy old lady, then I was the sexual object to be played with, and before that I was something else. And before that I was something else. And I've never been given the space, except for the people who actually love me and know me, and people who have come to a different place of consciousness about the full humanity of men and women. I was never treated as a full human being. I wasn't even treated as a full human being by my own parents who loved me. My mom told me many years later that one of the very first fights that she and my dad had as a young married couple, I was born 9 months and 1 day after they were married. This was the 1950s. And so there I am, little teen tiny baby in a crib. I have no memory of this because I could not possibly have a memory of it. My mother looks down. They're both standing there, the nice new parents, admiring their little cute baby daughter girl, probably under a big pink blanket. And my mom said, "Oh, her life is going to be so different than mine. I'm going to make sure she goes to college." And my dad said, "Why should she go to college? Because girls don't do anything that needs college. Why should we even think about paying for college for a girl?" And that was my mom then turned around and said to him, she said, "If you ever say that to her or act that way anytime in her presence, I will take this little baby girl and I will leave you and I will go somewhere where you'll never find either of us ever again." And so that is my parents' first fight over my crib. It wasn't about me per se. My mom obviously was standing up for herself, because she had already been treated so terribly by the whole culture around her, and she always wanted to go to college. So she's casting that on her daughter. And I came to realize that later on, and how much I was shaped by my mother's pre-feminist narrative. But that was my dad, my beloved dad, who I came to and he changed. He became different. But that's what it's like to grow up as a girl in this culture, is that you sit there, you don't have to breathe, basically. That's all you have to do, breathe and have a heartbeat before somebody starts telling you who you're supposed to be, and then treating you accordingly. And maybe we just do that all the time to all of each other. But I do know it's particularly bad. The things that are cast at women, and you know this. I'm not telling you anything that your wife hasn't told you, or that you're not aware of yourself. For women and people who haven't had power, Black people, immigrants. It's like, it's really, it's hard. And sometimes when I hear the bro anxiety, I just think to myself, you guys, I'm so sorry. Welcome to the human race. This is how it is. And guess what? We can all get there together if we learn to really see the full humanity in one another. And so having demands of full humanity from people who have been completely unwilling to offer full humanity to so many other people. I realize that it's my job as a Christian to do that, but I also realize that it's way seriously painful and difficult, and takes an enormous amount of effort, spiritual maturity, and just kind of emotional maturity. Because what you want to do is you just want to walk away and say, tough, sorry,
Yeah. No, I think you're right that the habits, the kind of learned relational habits of our inherited domination system show up, and they're not things you ever fully recover from, be it the way expectations are put on you, regardless of where you exist in the order you internalize them. So sometimes each side of patriarchal assumptions diminish the full humanhood of both, because the expectations of 70 years ago male provider and blah 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 in our economic situation, and one where doing that involves like distancing yourself from care for the rest of your family, all these other kinds of, like, there's a way these inherited habits lead to a lack of flourishing for so many people. And usually we're most aware of the way the other people's inherited habits impact us better than how we are. And you're right. Like, I mean, there are tons of them. I mean, I'm a Southern preacher's kid from the South with multiple generations of it. I'm constantly asking God to give me the patience to listen well when old habits die hard in my relationship with my partner. And I don't think any of the time something gets pointed out, my initial response is, you know what? I am so looking forward to understanding it from your perspective and recognizing the way I've blindly inherited something. And I'm going to avoid getting hyperbolic and defensive right now. Right? Like I always start doing it, then I like catch myself and then go, I'm going to guess when like 2 weeks after I think through this all rationally and something, I'll get around to seeing it differently. And I'm sitting there struggling to try to understand. And this is with my favorite human being. Right. You know, and you know, I'm like, but am I the most compassionate patriarch you've had to tolerate the BS from? And you know, so like I know that, and like I'm always like, I've told her, like, please interrupt me if I'm doing something where Cora's going to create expectations that this is okay, right? Like, and I learned tons just in being a father to a daughter that I didn't learn with Elgin. And then when you see it coming, when you see that she's internalized those expectations, voicing it out as fear to me, and I'm like, no, you didn't do anything. There's no need to apologize. Like, if you're going to apologize, you should have done something. You just voiced your own experience and need in a moment, and that is a good thing. I'm glad you have a voice and feel comfortable, you know. So, like, just knowing how difficult it is for someone who I think I'm in the top half of being responsive. I'm not going to think I'm better than that. But then you take that down just to like someone who you share like amazing existence with, and then go like, now I want to do it with these guys at the cigar store, or like it's that challenge of like refusing or resisting contempt for the other so you can listen. And I think the difficult thing, one of the reasons it's extremely hard in our culture in a unique way, is it a culture without a reservoir of grace. Then any criticism you legitimate is a judgment of your personhood.
Yes, I think that that's exactly right. I think that identity politics, I don't know that identity politics is particularly bad, because identity politics actually is a sort of a secular attempt to speak to all of these things that we're talking about here, and to affirm the identities of multiple groups of people across a pluralistic democracy. And then how in the world do you make that work? You know, because we don't really know yet, because nobody's tried to really do it yet in world history. We're all stumbling around the dark here. But if it's without some sort of, I love the way you said reservoirs of grace. That's certainly the way that I think about it too. I think that is the way that traditional Jewish and Christian Abrahamic faiths would think about it. I want to say Judeo-Christian Abrahamic faiths would think about it. But, you know, any kind of reservoir of something that calls us to be our best selves in the midst of that. And to have that reflective humility piece, that's also a necessary piece of identity politics, should be a necessary piece of identity politics, is to be able to look at yourself. And I just did that when I told the story about, and when I'm sitting here sort of challenging you, you know, I mean, it's like, I get that. I love your empathy. Thank you for explaining this to me. It's hard for me to understand it. And then just sort of the eye roll, you know, is like, but wait a second, people, let's get real here, because this is what women have had to face their entire lives. And so a bunch of guys having to face it right now, and this is what we get This is what happens when they get mad. I mean, this is a real big fit that they're throwing just because of these things. I mean, it's deep. I get it, but still, it's like, yeah, we have like how many thousands of years of patriarchy hitting women on the head and telling us we can't be anything. And so for me, the check comes by saying, stay at the table, stay at the table, stay at the table, listen to it through. Can you actually hear the empathy in this story? You know, and what I can hear is I can hear the empathy in my own story. And maybe that's just a better place for me to start. And that is my father. And you said it without knowing it, because the pain and suffering that patriarchy has put on men for all the same time it's been telling women we're subhuman. The pain is put on you all is that you're gods. And that's not an easy position to be in. It's like you're the one who has to protect, provide, sustain, make sure that all of the women and children in your care are safe, and you want them to be safe. I mean, you're a human being. You want them to be safe. You love these people. And so that has been, it's sort of just a massive burdensome responsibility. And when you start talking about changing an economic system that men can no longer fulfill that fundamental thousands of years expectation on them, that's pretty big stuff. And so I just said real briefly that I can tie it into my own family, because my father was not an idiot, and my father was not a sexist fool. What my father was, and people who are my regular readers know this, is that my father was a deeply closeted gay man. And so he actually had an identity that was being denied him by the expectations of that patriarchal system that you're talking about, is that he was not allowed to be masculine in the way that he experienced masculinity. He was not allowed really to be who he wanted to be because of the expectations of a family business, the expectations of marriage, etc., that were all put on him by a cultural pattern. And I think that for my dad, what that meant at certain periods of his life is that in order to survive his own internal disconnection, he had to pretend to be what the culture expected him to be and say, and not who he really was. Because every time he would sort of try to be himself, he himself would be ridiculed. So I've seen that. I've seen how how this with men and women just sort of negatively impacted, not just our culture in general, but this is very specific kinds of ways in which these cultural patterns come into our lives and unground us, unmoor us, and give us things that we have to deal with really for the rest of our lives. So that's the piece. Just when I think about someone like Jordan Peterson or Joe Rogan or what have you, I know that those men have decent things to say, and I know that they're fully human. And then I ask myself, okay, how much of this is a real journey for them in which they are struggling toward an expression of their full humanity, and how much of it is grift? Because there is some level that where I think one of the most valuable tools I certainly have in my toolkit right now is being able to separate the truly malevolent and the people who are sort of using this moment to forward their own agendas, enrich themselves, etc., versus the people who have genuine psychological, spiritual, emotional needs, and who are what I would call the deceived. So you have the deceivers who have malevolent intent, and then you have those who I think are the guys mostly in your cigar bar. You have those people who actually are experiencing the world exactly as you explain it, but they're being deceived by narratives that are not true about either masculinity or femininity or Black people or immigrants or any of those things. They're being fed a narrative, of a malevolent narrative, of holding other people back in order that they can restore their sense of self-command.
Yeah. Yeah. There's one book that popped in mind about what you were saying is Paul Woodruff, he's a philosopher at UT Austin, wrote a book called Reverence, and there's a second edition that came out not too long ago. But in it, he's talking about kind of our culture's lost this virtue of reverence, which he describes in it how it emerges with our capacity to stand in awe before our limits and places we lack control. And historically, that's been like in relation to God, truth, justice, nature, your own death, right? These kinds of things. And that reverence, and then he kind of picks it up in a Western space, but then shows how, here's how it played out in the Greek tradition. Here's how it played out in Chinese traditions. And that one of the things that is being significantly undermined by the kind of neoliberal economic order and the way it's reshaping media relationships and such is the cultivation of reverence and the celebration of people that have it. Right.
Yeah.
So like one of the features of someone, when you think of people that are inspirational, are someone that has reverence, or someone that like you kind of trust them because they're well aware of their finitude and their limits of what lies beyond their own mastery. And they know that's true about them and others. And I think that part of what the shift of late modern context has been, we only really acknowledge the parts of the world we can control, be it empirically or through data. Like if it's parts of reality we can bifurcate and extract, things we can count, control, and manage, then those have been what we poured so much energy in, that then who is the ideal leader and who we trust is someone who can describe reality as if it is just those things that are manageable and controllable and buildable. And it's like he describes it as the way that this kind of logic has gone around to all these cultures and just deflated it of reverence. And it's a way of talking about the like a culture without the depths of grace in it, in a way that's much more open to other religious traditions. Like for Christians, like you're made in the image of God and you can't do a goddamn thing about it, right? Like it's just like, this is just who you are. Sorry, it's above your pay grade to say you're not lovable. But underneath it, like how that gets expressed is reverence, and it's a beautiful philosophical reflection on it. There is a cool YouTube video if people are interested. Just type in his name and reverence, and you can skip 330 some pages of.
I was thinking about when you're
not a hard read.
When you were talking about that, I was thinking about the work that I've done around gratitude. And of course we have the whole new language that social scientists are talking about around awe, which is another word for reverence, of course. But if anybody wants something that's short and quicker and a lot less philosophical than what we've been talking about here in this very geeky fashion, go to the Grateful, I think it's called, grateful.org website. It's the biggest website on gratitude on online space. It's a wonderful website. And on their very front page, they have a video from Brother David Steindl-Rast, who is a 95-year-old monk. And his, it's called A Grateful Day. And it's like 8 minutes long, and it's absolutely beautiful. And what it is it's a visual and lyrical experience of reverence. And it's not theological in that it's not doctrinal, because it doesn't appeal to one religion or, elevate one over another, but it is theological in that there is a God presence, a divine presence in it. So I'd say that's theology. But it's also incredibly inclusive, and it's not a big book. It's just a Grateful Day, and it takes you to that point where all of a sudden your perspective can shift. And I guess, that's people have been saying, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? What are we going to do? We're going to do a lot over the next 4 years. We're going to have to stand up for justice. We're going to have to put our bodies at risk for people whose bodies are going to be at risk. We're going to have to do things we never imagined doing before in terms of that sort of activity. And at the same time, we're going to have to also figure out ways of being sustained, being renewed. Joy. Somebody put in the comments about Advent at Word and Way, which I think it is Word and Way. Unsettled Advent, I think they're doing. And that's a great topic. But I announced a couple weeks ago at the cottage that we were going to do justice and joy. And I was actually thinking that Harris might win, and that'd be a really interesting time to talk about joy theologically rather than just joy in some political system or an outcome of something in the world. And so what I did in the last week is I put a question mark behind the statement. So instead of it's an advent of justice and joy, it's an advent of justice and joy. And so that's kind of when people say, what are we going to do? Here we are 90 minutes later. But that's what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be aware and alert and paying attention and all those things to both of those things simultaneously, because I think that's the only path here ahead, is that we're going to have to be committed to justice in ways that we maybe never imagined before, especially if you're a white person, and be open to the celebration of joy, even in the midst of what feels like just agonizing loss. And so that's kind of, that's what I'm moving toward, I hope.
Well, I'm glad there's a question mark. Not an exclamation point.
No, not an exclamation point. Oh my gosh. If I make fun again of live, laugh, love pillows, I think I'll be no more good. So
well,
Kristen Dumais and I just have this running joke over at the convocation where we make fun of that pillow. So yeah, and so I mean the other piece of it for those of you who take these things really seriously is, and I've been saying this actually all year, if you've been paying attention to what's been happening over the cottage, is that we have this baptismal vow. And every mainline denomination, the Catholic Church and the Orthodox, all have some form of it. And that is in the Episcopal Church, it's will you strive to work for justice and peace and respect the dignity of every human being. So there's a sort of a single baptismal vow that combines those things. And one of the things I guess I've noticed over the years is that you have some churches where you say, will you strive for justice and peace? And then the church goes, yay, yes, indeed, we will do that. We will do that. And then, and respect the dignity of every human being. And it's like, oh, wait a second. Was there a clause attached to the justice and peace thing? Oh yeah. Dignity and respect. That's where joy and gratitude and all those things kind of go along. And so anyway, then there's congregations who hear not justice and peace part, but they only hear, oh yeah, dignity and respect. That means we're going to be really nice. We're going to be happy over here, and we're going to like everybody, and we're not going to make any waves, and we're going to let everybody feel really comfortable in this congregation. So yes, yay, we're going to do that? And the baptismal vow is both justice and peace and dignity and respect. Boom. Every human being matters. And that just makes me completely crazy. And the reason I've been harping on it is I don't know how to do it. And I realize how much that's the central vision, and that's the central thing, that what that's what being a follower of Jesus is all about right now.
Yeah. Well, we did it. We talked longer than we planned to.
Oh, we did 90 minutes. I was just no, I said no more than 90 minutes because I was so exhausted.
Well, then when we completed our task, now we're gonna go do whatever else we're doing the rest of the day. But this has been as fun as it gets having this kind of conversation. But I always like getting to talk to you and hang out in the chat with all the
with really cool people.
Of the Substack. Yeah.
Yeah, and homebrewed. I mean, I see people in this that I never see over in my stuff. And so it's a nice cross pollination, I think, of the two communities. So
oh yeah. Well, yeah. I think next week the panel thing with you and Gary Dorian and Robbie's coming out on the podcast. So
that was good. That was from
I wasn't in the room when it happened, and I listened to it and was like, oh, this is too good. I gotta share this.
So. Oh gosh, that's great. Gary Dorian was fantastic. That was at Theology Beer Camp. For people who don't know what we're talking about, there was a great panel, and I got to be on it with amazing people. But I got to sit between Robbie Jones, who I love and work with all the time. And so I'm used to Robbie, but then Gary Dorian. And Gary really just kind of threw a wrench in Robbie's and my usual shtick. And so we were all really engaged in a good way. So.
Yeah. No, it was awesome. Yeah. All righty. Well, we'll see you all next week, or not next week, next time.
Yeah, next time. We don't know when.
After the Christmas break, convocation goes on a more regular basis, the podcast part.
Yeah, we haven't quite worked it all out yet, but the general plan is during the first 100 days of the next administration, starting probably about 2 weeks before, we're going to make sure that the convocation, the podcast I do with Robbie, Jamar, and Kristen, is definitely weekly. To help people process. And over there, we do some theology and some spirituality, but we do a lot more analysis. And that's good. But you and I, we get to geek out. I mean, who else am I going to talk to who brings up reverence? And I mean, honestly, your analysis of bro culture and patriarchy, painful to listen to, but absolutely brilliant trip. And I really apologize that I the patience to listen before, because you've been trying to tell me this for months and months and months and months, and I was dismissing you, and I didn't mean to do that. I'm sorry.
Well, I missed it, probably because I've internalized such expectation that everything I say should be received with gratitude. Then I just didn't even pick up on it, Diana.
Well, I think we should tell them that I called you the day after the election. I literally said to Trip, okay, you were 100% right, and I was wrong. And so there it is in print, in public, on video. Trip was right. I was wrong about the election. And I wish it happened the other way around, my friend.
Me too. I would like the Richard version.
I like the Richard version too, that there were all those secret Harris voters that were going to go to the polls and turn it all around. Yeah.
Whoop. All righty. We'll talk to you later.
It's going to be a hell of a 4 years.
Yeah, it will.
And Diana swore 3 times in this podcast. So that's just the beginning, people.
Just the beginning.
Just the beginning.
Secret. Diana's got potty mouth. I'm sure y'all didn't know.
It's because I'm over 60. They say it's an early sign of something going wrong in your brain.
Ooh.
So I'll take it.
I don't know. Maybe Joe Biden's last press conference, he'll just let it slide. Just come out there dropping F-bombs all over the place.
Somebody says blame Richard. Oh my gosh.
All righty.
Bye, everybody.